I thought I'd do a little update on where I'm up to with the car. The last film was me starting the engine, and I'm getting pretty close to being able to drive it for the first time, but I'm still waiting for a few just little bits and pieces before I can do that. I'll go through what those are in a sec. Last week, because of the way the Easter and Anzac holidays fell, I was actually able to take a whole week off work. I think a lot of people did that actually, and so I've been able to get quite a bit done, and we can go through what that is now. So the first thing I've done is made a toolbox. This is just a wooden box that sits there with bits and pieces in it. Behind here I've actually got the battery cutout switch. So that's one of those battery isolators that takes this big red key. The switch is mounted behind the cover there, and we probably can't really see it, but it kind of goes up there, up underneath the instrument panel, and that allows me to disconnect the battery, which is for safety, and also if you take the key away it would make it pretty hard to steal the car. Not that I think anyone would ever try to steal it anyway, because I don't think most people would know how to drive it. But the other thing we can see in there is I've finished all the footwells and put all the flooring back in. I gave that a paint. You can see the difference in the fresh paint to the old paint. The little battery there is just to turn on the instrument lights at the moment so that you can actually see under there. What else have I done? I bolted in the drive shaft, which if we look under here, you can see the drive shafts in there. I actually had a problem, which is these are special bolts. They've got special heads on them. They're sort of captive. They're like a D-shaped head, and they run up against a flange on the torque tube flange here. And the problem was the bolts were too long, and I couldn't actually get them through the holes. So I had to take the flange off and thread them through, and then put the flange back on. But I also discovered that these bolts, which are new, the shoulder on them was machined too fat, and they wouldn't actually fit through the hole. So I had to go and machine them all down on the lathe to get them all to fit nicely. But I finally got the drive shaft in, which is a pain of a job because I'm sort of doing it by myself, lying underneath the car. So you're doing everything upside down, and there's grease and there's anti-lock stuff, and it's quite tricky. I do need to get the little spring clip thing to hold the cover down. It's the same sort of clip that you get on a mag Austin 7 engine, so I need to see if somebody's got an old one lying around. I properly bolted in the remote gearbox top. Again, that's one of those things where it's actually quite hard to do by yourself, so I had to sort of lie under the car with a spanner on one side, reach my arm round through with this cover off, and I could just get a spanner on the bolt on the top. Unfortunately, I had the battery sitting right there, and the earth was still connected, and I did manage to short between one of these bolts and the positive terminal, which was a bit exciting. But no harm done there. What else have I done? The steering wheel isn't actually bolted on yet. I need to put the nut back on there, and I need to figure out what I'm going to do with this. It's not quite centralized, so I may need to make up some sort of ring that holds that in place. What else? The battery cables, I actually ordered 4 of them online. You used to just be able to buy those sort of things at Repco and places like that, but nobody seems to do that sort of stuff anymore. And the ones you can get from Supercheap are blue, which is no good. Unfortunately, when they sent me the cables, they actually sent me one blue one. So I didn't use that. What I did is I rearranged where I was running the wires. I was originally going to run the negative up to here somewhere, and then run another cable down to the starter motor down here. What I decided to do instead is run the negative across the front of the battery box to a stud here on the firewall, and that'll be my main earth point. And what I've actually ordered is an earth strap from a Mini, a more modern Mini, not the modern Minis, but the 60s Minis, and they use a braided earth strap and what I'm going to do is attach that from here down to one of the starter motor mounting bolts. So that will give me a direct, basically the starter motor is directly across the battery then. So the starter motor on an Austin 7 doesn't have a solenoid, it's actually got this physical switch. That's what this big thing is on top. And another thing I did was rigged up a cable, because this is pulled by a cable which is up next to the steering wheel. I'll show you that in a second. So I wrote all this up on my blog, and somebody actually left me a comment which was quite useful. They actually suggested several things that were quite useful, and one was about this, and I was using braided stainless steel cable. What I've done is I've actually replaced it with a single piece of spring wire, piano wire, and I machined up this little brass thing to go through the lever, and there's a little shoulder here and there's the screw, and I sort of looped the end of the wire back on itself and just crimped it with a little piece of copper tube. So there's a loop there that's free to move, and this solid wire goes all the way up through a little sort of stud that I made down here, up to the starter pull, which is here, and the whole thing's running through a Bowden cable that I made using a piece of this is net curtain wire, because it's sort of a springy flexible outer, and you can see the wire just comes up through there, and then to start the engine you just pull on that, which pulls the lever on the starter motor, and that fires the starter motor. It'll be interesting to see if that holds up. Of course, even if it doesn't, you've always got the handle on the front there to start it with. What else have I done? The coil's all mounted, of course. I have started looking at the accelerator. If we look over here, I've kind of hooked up a temporary sort of linkage. The geometry of this is wrong, but it's close enough that I could figure out what sort of levers I needed. So as you push the throttle pedal, it moves the shaft, which goes up and down, and that's going to move the butterfly on the carburetor. And so I've ordered from the SU people in the UK the correct lever to go on here, and instead of a piece of wire, because this piece of wire in this orientation can't really move. The only reason this is working is because the wire can bend. But what I'm going to use is a shaft with ball ends, one up here and one down here, and that gives you the movement you need to translate the up and down in one plane into the up and down in another. Since we're on this side of the engine, the other thing I did is I welded in this is the boss for the oxygen sensor, and I welded on the flange and the flange on the muffler, and so that's all attached now. I was being so careful to make sure I got this at right angles to this pipe, I forgot to get the alignment of the bolts exactly right, which is why this one, there's 3 bolts and it should be rotated round just a little bit, but I don't think anyone will notice. I also made the battery tie downs. That's these, and there's a strap across the top. A 3mm piece of steel like that isn't actually strong enough. When you try to torque down these nuts, it actually bends. So I welded a piece of bar across the top, and then I covered everything in heat shrink because I didn't really want a metal bar flapping around between the battery terminals. Let's see, what else is there? The exhaust is going to be interesting because originally my plan was to have this muffler mounted the other way up. So this was up here, so it would come up this way, and then have a straight pipe going to the back of the car. The problem is that won't work because once you've got a mudguard here, which I haven't made yet, obviously, that needs quite a bit of clearance. So probably 3.5, 4 inches clearance above the wheel. So that puts the mudguard right here, which means the pipe will have to go up here. And this is pretty much exactly where the passenger's shoulder goes. So My other thought was then bringing the pipe down and exiting in front of the wheel here. But I don't think that's going to work either, because it's not far away. It would basically be ahead of the passenger. So you have to imagine the passenger is right back here, if there is a passenger. So what I'm wondering is, you can actually buy this flexible stainless steel ducting stuff, specifically for exhausts. And I'm wondering if I can use that somehow to route it under here, and then have a flat pipe, which would be something like this, coming out the back here, with the Brooklands fishtail on it. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to see what I can do, but I'm pleased with that bit of the exhaust anyway. That came out pretty well. It's actually not quite level. It sort of slopes down just a little bit, but I think that'll be fine. Obviously the bonnet's not on it at the moment, because one, it makes it a lot easier to work on the car when you can just pull the bonnet off. And two, I'm going to need to cut a big hole in the side of it to clear all the manifolding. I actually want to make a new bonnet, because Joss pointed out to me I got the line off the hinge on the side wrong. I put it on an angle, but really it should be flat. But I can make another bonnet. But that's pretty much it. It's getting there. Oh, the other thing I'm waiting for, as well as the other parts from the SU people in the UK, is the little thing that holds the choke cable on. So the choke cable I've just run up here, and it goes through a little grommet. This is also the line for the oil gauge. You can see there's a takeoff here, and there's just an anti-vibration loop there. And I just made these little brass clips to hold it in place. The battery cables are held in with just leather P-clips I made. And I was lucky on the inside I was able to find some brass acorn nuts, so you don't have the sharp edges of the bolts sticking through. This cover is here, of course, because the back of the switch is just open. And if you've got a toolbox full of metal tools rattling around, and this is the positive lead, you don't really want those shorting out against it. The other thing I'll do is you can get covers to go over these, so I'll probably do that. The fuel system, at the moment, there's just this pipe. So I'm going to have to join a piece of hose onto that somehow. And I've actually got some hard line to run the fuel line, and that'll have to run under the car. Probably come up here somewhere, and I'll run a little fuel filter. Probably one of the see-through kinds, so you can actually see that the fuel's flowing. The Innovate unit that I bought, which the oxygen sensor goes into, is their higher end model. So it actually has a whole bunch of other inputs and outputs I could use. And one of them I could do is, if I could hook a potentiometer up to the carb butterfly, I could actually read what position the butterfly is at. I don't know what use that would be, but it would be interesting. What would actually be more interesting is figuring out a way that you could measure the position of the carb needle. So I don't know how I would do that without affecting it, but theoretically, if you had that and the throttle position, the mixture and the revs that you're doing, you could figure out exactly what needle you needed. But it's getting there. It doesn't really seem to leak anything much at the moment, which I suspect will change when I start running it, but it's almost there. I'm hoping to try driving it soon, hopefully within the next week or so. And then I need to do all the proper wiring. So the first time I drive it, I'm just going to rig up the ignition temporarily with a big switch in the cockpit, so I can turn it off in a hurry if I need to. So after doing all the wiring, I need to figure out the end of the exhaust, figure out mudguards, and build a petrol tank for it. And then there's all fiddly bits and pieces like the lights and the little Brooklyn screen, how to hold down the straps for the boot lid. Same on the bonnet, there'll be straps to hold the bonnet down. Like I say, I'll probably make a new bonnet, but I don't need that straight away. I need to run a line of screws along here because the firewall isn't actually really attached at this point. It's just kind of floating. So the idea was run some screws through there. I got my spacing a bit wrong, so there's a bit of a gap, but I've got some very long screws and I'll use plastic spacers in between there to bolt all that together. It doesn't really matter because, I mean, this bit you don't lean against. The passenger back of the seat will be here. You can see how far back the passenger is. The driver's seat I'll get upholstered professionally, I think. This is just an original, so I've got something I can show them what kind of pattern the originals were. Yeah, other than that, that's pretty much getting there, I think. So whether or not I film the first drive, I'll wait and see, because it could all go wrong, but I'll see what I can do.